Today, in this story, we explore humanity's unique ability to see through state-of-the-art alien cloaking devices. But first, check to see if you're subscribed. It's completely free, which means you'll never miss any of our videos. Now let's get to the story. Next to the graded one, we manipulated appendages together, excitedly darting through the corridors of the point station, her sequoid legs tapping their tips softly as they landed on the stainless steel floor, her two large emerald compound eyes taking in all the information around her as she dodged another Krier, their lobster-like abdomens clawing at each other. They raised their sharp mantis arms in an exasperated pose, and she waved her antenna at them in an apologetic gesture. She was in too much of a hurry to offer a proper apology. A new species was coming to see her work, and she needed to be prepared. Her jawbone clicked at the thought of the new addition to the galactic stage. Unlike the Valorians, although there are many, they are much smaller. Their fluffy heads just reached the belly of her people, and she was in the middle of the attached, but she heard they were so close that the soldiers couldn't make them completely sloping. It was really confusing until she heard that they praised the seriousness of her native city from level 13 in the world. The highest-ranked planet to ever have sentient life is Noah's planet from the 8th level Death World, but it is still relatively normal. In fact, one of her colleagues mentioned that their scientists told them that if the gravity was a little higher, they wouldn't let me leave their planet, and that it would be difficult to leave the atmosphere. But that's not the case. Nair gave her manipulators a description of their anatomy in a pamphlet that was reluctantly shared by all the other members of the galactic community after many spins that were too constructed from their anatomy to be her description. They have only one head common to the group, but their brains are divided into two hemispheres. They have two eyes, but their eyes themselves have 6 muscles that help move the iris. Then there is their respiratory system. They have a strange way of moving oxygen around the body. These things are called lung meat sacs. This allows oxygen to expand and diffuse in their blood, which is iron-based, not copper-based like hers, and requires far less oxygen than the body itself and many other species require. In fact, their atmosphere is only 21% oxygen, 20% less than everything else. It was crazy and left the people near us stretched out and giddy. She stopped at the red airlock door and nodded. She was meant to meet her guests at. She could think about their crazy anatomy later, but right now she needed to focus on presenting her work. She was also very proud of it. V should almost finish showing them. The lab I should make a grand entrance near clacked, her mandibles together loudly to get the attention of her guests, and Bree turned first, her 9 eyes facing in all directions. On top of her fuzzy body, the humans, she thinks they're called, turned afterwards, and almost immediately jumped backwards. Their eyes widened to find that one of the 3 had attached a pendant to their hip. Looking for something that wasn't there, he had thick poll fur over his mouth, crisp, white, and seemingly well-groomed. The fur above his head was also white, polished, and glistening in the light from the planet below and the light above. It is an alien. One of them whispered in a bitter voice that the translator had not translated well. One of them has turned completely white, looks like a young person wearing a green suit, and looks like Crowleaf. His face was completely hairless, while his head was decorated with light golden fur. He murmured next to it, "Listen, if I get the face that hugs me, just shoot me." The person in green whispered to the person in gray, face bright and green, swallowed hard and trembling by the person speaking, probably a reaction of fear. He had less hair than his older companion, but there was a patch of hair on his chin, and his head was hairless. And Nyla bowed her head and clicked slowly in confusion. Turns its elongated head almost completely before looking back at people. She didn't know they could change color to fascinate me. I do not know what a xenomorph is. I don't see anyone in the vicinity other than myself and my colleague here, she stated, simply watching their reaction. Their chests seemed to rise and fall slowly as they took a closer look at her. The older human with fur over his mouth, looking at her with predatory eyes, slowly slides down her entire length, causing her antennae to rise. It wasn't a good feeling, and she was happy when it was over. "You're right, sorry. You look like a monster from one of her old horror movies, but you are very different." Nara rubbed her amazing appendages together as she took several steps forward, towering over the people. The young woman in the green suit turned an even paler white as she took several steps back to herself. He could easily break her leg, so I don't want it to detract from the demo. If I could clear up any misunderstandings, I would, and I pointed to the other 2. The older person looked a lot calmer now. She was brushing her hair over her lips and looked at him. She said, "Okay, start. Your head is tubular, looking very similar to the above species, and there's not much you can do about it. Then there's your back. Your biomechanical tubes stick out in the right places, and your shield is almost black," he said, actually holding out a slightly grasping hand as he counted each simile. Each one makes the white man shake her eyes harder, never leaving him. But you have mantle plate arms above your grasping appendages, a lower body more like a lobster, and a mouth with rather large mandibles, and your eyes are trapped with them. Attract. So my own colleagues need to calm down and shape up. The human shouted at last line more at his companions, rather than at Nup, both of them snapping to a more upright position. He nodded and turned back to her, extending an appendage towards her own. I backslash him. Sorry about our conduct. It was a knee-jerk reaction. We were briefed on who we were going to meet, but to be honest, I didn't pay much attention except for the mention of the secret ship. He let out a soft, strange gasp as he looked at her like he was expecting something, and she looked at him, just looking to absorb the information. So she was scared of them and could not do anything. Unfortunately, she can see more exciting reactions. What do you do with additional substances? She asked for this with her manipulator. People looked at her and then held his daughter companies there. It's a handshake. This is the official greeting of my species. Believing it was the word for a handshake, she moved it up and down like a child would, slowly mimicking the motion until their pendants made a sound and the older man's lips curled and his teeth loosened. This made her antennae twitch again, pulling the manipulator back towards her. When you skipped the speech, she clicked on them, clicked and looked at them. The eyes of the older people narrowed. When both young people are smooth, they are suitable for green. No longer light white, gray is gray, and the color is pink. Now, yes, we do go into his sobbing dialogue in weird ways, and the translator is still struggling to pick up the voice. Don't be a grumpy bastard, Todd. She's a scientist, not a goddamn door-to-door salesman. Algalva is as confused at home as the green Algalva, who tells the older man, Todd, his name. Apparently, Nero was in love. All this new information. She was dealing with people, and Todd slowly looked back at the man in green, not showing his eating smile as the man in green muttered. I needed her to release his chest a little, expanding and contracting again before he dropped his hand. Outside, gesturing for Nero to move forward, where she thought it was quite like Vero's jet to get through it all, leading Ms. Nara turned excitedly and clicked twice on Bree, who squealed back and pounced away. It was the closest show in V knew when she disappeared behind the airlock that she had strolled through herself. She turned to the window, pulled out a data pad, and tapped a few points on the surface. Well, that's a good thing. We had this amazing view. Isn't this a great place for some science? She exclaimed excitedly as the 4 tall ships began to sail around the edge of the Earth. They almost looked like spearheads, with crescent-shaped wings sprouting from the back of the theory. The sharp tip is pointed forward, and the silver surface shines. In the light of the planet, as the spacecraft approached, one of the nearby people called out in a loud voice, I give you this. Your ship is very beautiful, gray-eyed people. Eventually, when his eyes were locked on the boat and he looked at her forever, Todd looked to iron the coat over his lips again. Nero began to suspect that this was a habit of his, and as he thought about it, he seemed to admire the ships as they slowly came to a stop a few moments from the station, far enough away to be unaffected by gravity. The gravity generator does weird things to ships smaller than a certain size when they get too close, but I didn't see too much invisible toad snarling. She turned to Nero with the upcoming look, agreeing that her horn-shaped tail beats the ground with a small foot. Yes, their invisible module. Currently offline, I hope we can showcase the rest of their capabilities. First, they are the first of their kind, built by my people. After all, she said naughty. Frankly, she just wants to show her work to her and her colleagues. She was very proud of her team as they put their heads together to build these ships. What other features would you like to see? I felt like this trip was to see your secret fashion, not to show off that I missed a fight. This end of Todd B turns into a green Jeremy, who seems to bump into the walking NF, making a loud ringing noise on the metal floor as his nearer body hits it with more force. Let the lady show off her toys. You're already there. You can't miss your stupid show anymore. He hit the back of Jeremy's head. The impact made a pop sound as Jeremy rubbed, the place wincing in pain and apparently laughing as Todd looked at the gray man who had something to add to the walker. Roaring Walter, he quickly shook his head from side to side, raised his manipulative appendages, and waved them as well. Nope, nothing, sir. I'd love to see the other features. This lovely lady worked on it. He answered quickly and nodded. Oddly enough, these people were really fascinating, and she would study them all day if she could, but she had to move on. Thanks, Todd. Well, we've done a lot of things for these ships, like new propulsion systems. Connecting her communicator to one of the ships outside and typing something quickly, she pressed the data pad, and it made a humming sound. Please move 30 blocks up at full speed. She let go of the button and looked at the farthest ship on the back left. She turned slowly downward. Almost like her own head, the boat jerked upwards and suddenly gained 30 grams in a few minutes. Todd, let the interpreter go. Not knowing what to do because of the noise, Nara turned and looked at him. Her lower jaws, rubbing together like a ship, stopped. We improved the speed of gymnastics and shortened 30 shaking times from 8 time units to just 6 units. It's a lot of work. G was hard on the pilot until V could use his little knowledge to improve the dampers. Another strange thing about humans is the way everyone eats. You can't be serious, Jeremy said, apparently in complete disbelief. What do you mean? Jeremy Nell's emerald green eyes sparkled as she expressed her disbelief that this would affect people so much. She and her team reduced maneuver time by 2 full-time units. This is not fast. It's like watching your boat move through molasses. Our ships would fly to smear Jeremy on the back of the head. Again, this time sounding much more painful. Even Nira flinched a bit as Jeremy hit the ground, and hard don't be and was all Todd grunted before clearing his throat and nodding to Nara for her to continue. She understands the problem much better. Now she expects them to be very similar to other species, just mixed together. Well, she pressed the button on her data plate again, and the buzz came from it again as she connected to another ship. She didn't say anything out loud, but she sent him a message. We have our new plasma cannons. She proudly shouted her clicks, which ended like the next ship, and the underside of the line slowly lowered a long barrel, slowly stretching outwards like a bright rainbow light shot forward and smashing into a small asteroid, 10 cricks wide. It turns into red-hot slag that flakes off and enters the atmosphere of the planet below, where it will safely burn and dissipate. She was very careful to have them aim at a smaller target. Well, that's cool. Walter nodded to himself in a nervous voice. He raised an eyebrow as the barrel slowly folded in on itself and vanished back into the underside of the ship. What was not yet near gave him a disbelieving look. Her mandibles spread apart, and her blade-like appendages, hanging down the tips of them, resting on the ground. No, they take time to charge, they use a lot of energy, and if you use them too quickly, you can cause them to melt your ship. She pointed to the dull surface of the underside. Part of the lining had been burned off by the cannon. Jeremy Todd commented and snapped, which silenced her very quickly, but this time Walter started the conversation instead of continuing. Where he left off. Exactly. We could blow that asteroid to smithereens, then blast some with our ship, and we'd have a diplomatic ship. Todd smacked the back of his head. Todd seemed to have this habit as well. These three must have been very familiar if they could show their strength and willingness to wield power around her so easily. If you say another word, I will grow your whole body and let you murmur Walter to visit the wedding. Pale like Jeremy, you wouldn't have a deadly face, because Walter quickly sprays quietly as Todd asks him to continue again. Nero began to think that nothing could impress them. In addition to the secret model, she wanted me to do this. Assuming we continue, she slowly presses the comm button again, and this time the wings of the next ship slowly fold until they become spear tips floating in space. With a flash of light, the silver figure was stretched like a rubber band until it disappeared. All that remains is a puff of silicone gas, right where it was before. Is it a faster-than-light leap? I thought you couldn't jump that close because of the warp bubble, Walter. Jeremy and even Todd seemed surprised this time, and each face twisted into different expressions. Yes, that was the reaction Nara had been looking for. It is fascinating to study their faces, the lines of their skin, and the effect they have on the body. You simply cannot be right. The warp bubbles would normally tear the ship apart if you used another FTL drive, but we implemented some of the same principles as our GRA generator. We have managed to ensure that long jumps are not only possible, but also cost-effective. She pressed something on the data sheet. As the silver shard flashed past the space station, the ship that had just disappeared reappeared inches away from the others. Its wings folded back as it maneuvered back into place, and another silver shard reappeared. It's really amazing. We've been looking for similar things. Advanced UPS has always complained that she has to jump out or rub in Todd. When her stock rubs, she sends it from them. She thinks the plasma cannon has been their favorite so far, but this is really good. Yes, we are also looking for a solution to that problem. I'm glad to have finally captured your interest. I suppose we'll be moving on to the main show. Then she excitedly gilded her pendant up onto the datapad, and the ships flickered as their secret modules began to slowly power up. They disappeared from her view from front to back, their forms invisible. So when you have to activate this mod, the ship gets really pretty. For a moment, Todd's amused question interrupted Nero's train of thought. She looked at Todd, who had an amused expression on his face. As he stared out the window, no, they couldn't see them. This should not be possible. Yes, I can see a slight flicker around the ship. Now, however, their power supply will probably be very meaningful, can absorb a lot of functions, or be heavy onboard computers. Jerry Walters' tone is still excited. Now his limbs were stuck in the cloth around his waist, and his eyes were locked in place. Those ships were, I didn't know, but yes, I could see it was too much like a thin sheet of glass. The swaying body was somehow cool, and Walter's eyes followed in the same direction. Nero couldn't believe how perfect the disguise was. Even during high-volume slimming machine testing, these vessels could not be detected. I know you have to act up. What was that? The pamphlet said, prank on me. The ship completely disappeared. She shuddered and squawked. Todd could barely get the words out of his mouth. No, they're right there. You're kidding me, Todd said, pointing out the window in disbelief. Slowly entered the data cover, where the disappearance of the ship was slowly entered. Please visit the doctor, please. Her care is very tight, and she can hardly see the environment. She fell heavily onto the floor and leaned against the cold wall, looking at the three people in front of her. Stealth mode is active. She used her pendant to turn the data field showing the ship status to the green slider. The facial expressions of the three people were the same, with slightly narrowed eyes, open mouths, and squinting eyes. No way. You're kidding us, because I'm not. Jeremy, Yo said he was throwing up his hands in anger. He frowned. It reminds her a lot of Todd now. In fact, he had the same folds of skin around his eyes when he yelled that you were messing with us. You have to be there. There is no way around it. Your invisibility seems like a shiny ship with a cool glint. There's no way I'm going to miss battle droids because of this poor stealth. Neela growled as he slowly turned the slide down, Todd and Walter watching intently as another flash of light brought the ships back into her view, their magnificent hulls gleaming again. In the light, elegant and beautiful, hanging in the void above the planet like silver and birds. I think she's serious, Jeremy. Walter butted into Jeremy's rant, shaking his shoulders. Rather roughly, Nero watched the muscles flex and move under the skin, as he did distract herself with a strange movement for a moment. While she tried to reconcile this information, her work for the past few rotations was useless. People see them just as clearly as when the mod is off. You shouldn't see them at all. We reduced the wavelength of the light reflected from the surface of our ships to the 450 nanocrick range. No one should see them. Nra nervously applauded and controlled her data pillow, whose ship reflectors had shortened the wavelengths of up to 430 nrk for all types of Galactic Council in the invisible color area, except for humans. Apparently, Todd looked a little comfortable before covering her pendants, all the real boys, so the secret modules are a bust. There was always a chance that Todd would nod as he joined the three of them. As he spoke, Todd turned and gave her a dramatic look that didn't mean the trip was worth it, other than the three of them bowing their heads. Todd pointed out the revealing what a small smile. That's its name. Nara finally remembered that FTL jump tech. It would make it much harder for us to hit hell. It might even give us an advantage against 90% of the galaxy. But Todd, we are here to get secret technology. Will we tell the big wig at home? Oops, I'm sorry. Our vision is so good, they stink. Yeah, but when we saw that FTL disk, Todd nodded, and right at that moment, information started piling up on her data panel, and the pilot started asking for coordinates or something. That's what we told them. In any case, they have been looking for a better FTL drive, so stealth drive is bad. Who, when we have success for us, swabs them before they start the beam, or wait. Would Nero consider this laughter to be laughter? Otherwise, these people would go crazy in front of her, which would definitely be bad news for her. Good for us. If we have to go to the negotiation chamber, then three people weakly clicked on each other and helped her get there. Many legs are convinced that a few months later, we can do some work. He cannot be proud of the team of researchers and developers, which is so meaningless to deal with their greatest threats. She tried to explain that the spectrum of human vision is much wider than theirs and that cutting down wavelengths like hers doesn't depress them. When she lied, Kern just yelled in her face. These ships are invisible to the entire galaxy and society. He forces her to resign, orders a private ship to be built for him, and sets out to prove her a fool. He curled up to the edge of this soul space to prove that he was going to slip past all of their detection methods from the very edge of their home system, so confident that he remained unseen and undetected. He maintained his confidence as he passed Neptune unopposed, sending reports to the Career Council of his successful infiltration and constantly rebuking Nero's idiotic report. They are definitely pretending. It was just an extremely lucky guess since it took her several turns to create the secret module, and the ship missed something, giving her no reason to lie. His confidence only improved as Saturn once again slipped over him without resistance. But as he was slowly approaching Jupiter, he began to feel that he seemed to be supervised. He could see easily Skimmer at the edge of his vision as he grew closer to the massive gas giant, almost imperceptible. He could see much more activity here. The large metal ring slowly turned to one of the moons and then warned. He quickly exploded. His ship is just a beautiful piece of shrapnel floating around a giant gas giant. Those were the last words he heard before he died. Goodbye.